Well, 3 years ago, Paula and I, we were sitting here with the film Undine, and 3 weeks later we then went to Paris in order to do the French press work, and then we got both infected with COVID. That was in March 2020. And I believe we were the first patients, well, you know, we did not introduce it to Germany, but we called it the French disease later on. You know, I had to lie in bed for 4 weeks, as had you, so we just talked on the phone a few times. And during these 4 weeks, you know, I had a previous project going on, but during these 4 weeks, I came to think of this spark, and I felt this spark. I had fever dreams that could have competed in Cannes in the competition, and all of this took place in the summer, you know, these fever dreams. And then there were the forest fires in Turkey. I went to Turkey that year, and together with my wife, we visited those areas where those forest fires were raging. And, you know, when I used to read something to my children when they were small, they used to always ask, what is the meaning of the German term Totenstill? It's silent as death. You know, because normally you hear something, but when it's silent as death, you don't hear anything. And when I was in those burned forests, it was really, you know, the silence of death. There is no wind that is getting caught in the branches or the leaves. There are no birds, no insects left. And then my friend Matthias Brandt asked me to read A Summer Night's Dream by Shakespeare, and I thought, okay, so, you know, the woods in the night, and that led to the creation of this story of the young people who spend the summer, and the actors suffer because my answers tend to go on for 20 minutes and more, and that's, of course, deadly here during the press conference. And I have a flu as well, and I'm taking medication that makes me really happy, so this can really go wrong here. But I haven't really answered your question. No, that was a very beautiful answer. Well, let me say it like this. When I was in bed and I was sick, then I thought, why do the French have summer movies as a genre, and the US Americans as well? You know, as a genre unto itself. And, you know, in our film, for example, you see that the car is breaking down. Someone says, I know a shortcut. Then there is a house in the woods. And that's, you know, the horror movie. And that in the American film is, you know, what makes you grow up or you die. Or it's both in the same movie. In the French movie, you've got, you know, 2 months of a summer break. And that's what the French call the éducation sentimentale. That is the sentimental education. You learn how to be a human being without your parents. And why do we only have summer movies in Germany where students come back home and say, Mom, I think I'm a homosexual, or why do you get a divorce? I can't go on studying at university. So I thought that is so regressive in America, in Germany, and in America and in France. I thought it's a very important genre. So I try to think about that, and that is why we have these kinds of storytelling structures there. The car, the house, the love, the absence of the parents. Because of the fact that we do not have any real interaction over long periods of the movie, Paula's character, for a very long time, just represents another level of longing. And that cannot really be, you know, put into practice in a way until they actually meet again. And it is very interesting also, you know, in the context of things developed there. The way they meet is just a different form of interaction, and it leads to something entirely else. You can really just, you know, delve into the fantasies and the ideas that Leon may have in his mind. Well, I actually see it in a very similar way. The two of them, they never really meet, and yet you get to see how much they like each other and sometimes detest each other. And there is a lot of projection going on because they don't know each other. Perhaps that's part of the love during that summer, because all of these characters do not really know what to expect, and they're looking for something, and then they end up finding something that they never expected. And that really was important for acting with Thomas as well. I mean, we met when we were 17, you know, in the dark valley and in the snow-capped mountains, and now to meet again, for me, was, you know, a new way of getting to know each other, looking at who you are today, and that also helps with developing the characters from the script. You know, the script is a document that gives you a framework, and I think the two of us had a new framework that we could set up for our characters, which was very helpful. It's a very subjective movie. We see all the different perspectives, but it's mainly his perspective. So, you know, the carefree kind of attitude of this rescue swimmer, you know, that he's so carefree, is so important in order to get him all riled up, you know, and the decisions were also based on what would, you know, what would Leon really hate to see in a different person, and what would throw him back into his self-hatred. And it was great not to really have to think about who David is, where he's from, what his, you know, inner feelings are like. No, he was just a trigger, if you will. And I think that the most potent instrument was to play things lightly and playfully. Well, for me, one of the great things about this project was that long before we shot that film, I knew that I was going to play that role. So I had a lot of time for preparing and to also, you know, then prepare again when the work started with Christian. And it's also, of course, important that Christian has an incredible talent for creating a space where everyone feels at home and feels well. Because artists who want to show the best version of their talent just need to be feel safe and need to feel self-confident. And I think as a director, our director really managed to do that well, relatively speaking. Yes, and I think that's where this, you know, levity comes from. In your opinion, what do you think? What is the greatest concern and the biggest, you know, what is the biggest burden on his soul for Leon? Because it's essential to me in that film, you know. He doesn't really have problems. He's just creating the problems himself, right? It's a form of paranoia, if you will. He doesn't really have any real problems, and that is very interesting. Well, I am really an expert in these kinds of characters, you know, that don't have any real problems, but who suffer from paranoia. No, but the actors, you know, when we had been shooting for 20 to 25 days, they asked me whether I know that, you know, the fear of the second novel and the question of who am I and all of these things, whether I'm familiar with those problems. And then they asked me why this bad novel would be called Club Sandwich. And at that moment, it became clear to me that my second film was called Cuba Libre. I did that with Hans, but he's innocent. And Cuba Libre, Club Sandwich, you know, they sound very similar. And when going back to the hotel room, you could probably order these two items as part of a menu. And that was a movie where I acted as if I was a director. I wanted to show everyone what I can do, all the things I've seen in my life, and I played the role of a director. And after 3 days, I realized that that was the most terrible I've ever experienced in my life. And that is basically what's happening to him. You know, it's might have been unconscious, subconscious, but, you know, he's kind of setting the stage for himself, Leon. And on that stage, he's playing the writer. He says, I have to work, I have to write. He's not going to the sea, he's not cooking, because he has to work so hard but keeps falling asleep. So these are experiences that I made myself and that I could really very well communicate to the actors.